All right. I am here with John from Action Figure Grader. We spoke before about mortgage and stuff. Um, and I wanted to pick his brain, so to speak, on what's going on with like Blackstone. I know there's another company called BlackRock that literally does the same thing. And someone commented and they're like, "Don't you mean BlackRock?" And I Googled it. I'm like, "Oh, same thing, different company." To me, it sounds like Blackstone sounds like a villain, like reminds me of a Black Mask or something, just like some corporate villain. So that's kind of interesting. But I'm here with John, and he's well. I mean, why don't you tell me? You obviously have a history of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, David, thanks for having me back on the channel, man. I love your channel as always, and great to be back chatting with you. And
Thanks.
yeah, I saw your video on Blackstone, and turning America into renters, and
Yeah.
it's I just started laughing because I actually have some previous experience with one of these Wall Street backed funds that are buying houses all over, and there's a number of them. It's not just BlackRock or any Blackstone, any of those other companies. There's a number of them doing this,
Yeah.
and a lot of it's kind of under the radar. And so I did work with one of these. I'd say probably about 6, 7 years ago, somewhere in that range. And we did a number of transactions for them, and it's a really interesting process. And I understand why a lot of folks are upset with these big Wall Street backed funds because
Hmm.
there's a lot of negatives associated with what they're doing, and so I got some experience on it, and just I don't know where you want me to go with it, but uh, it's
Well, so it's interesting. So a little history. We fled England over there forever ago, back in the 16, 1700s, because we hated the fact that there's a king and a bunch of royal people and rich people that owned everything and
serfs.
everyone's
We were
peasants.
serfs. Hmm.
Yep, we're all peasants. And so we left so we could create this, basically everyone could kind of have a little more. And so it's like, it's interesting that these kings are being replaced by corporations. And pretty soon they're just going to own everything like before, and we're going to own nothing.
Well,
So,
let me tell you on that point. That's a really good point, because uh, here's the counter argument to it. I'm not saying I agree with it, or I'm not saying
mhm,
I'm taking this side, but this is the counter argument that they would make. These companies really got into the business of buying these homes right after the financial crash of the Great Recession, 2008,
mhm,
2009. There was a glut of foreclosure properties on the market. I mean, they were everywhere because people had overextended themselves doing these adjustable rate mortgages or buying second and third and fourth properties that, stuff that properties were being purchased by people that had no business buying it, right? We talked about
yeah.
that in the previous video. So their argument is we were filling a market need as a floor. We were bringing the price floor to real estate during a time when nobody was buying them. Banks were
And
going
didn't
out
the
of business.
government, sorry to cut you off, but didn't the
So,
government want them to do this? Didn't they
yeah,
incentivize
yeah, to a certain extent they did. Because there was just such a glut of foreclosures, and the monetary system at that time. I don't know how much you kept up with it back then, but the monetary system was coming to the breaking point. Everything was frozen, literally.
them?
With the Lehman Brothers kind of shoe dropping, I think it was back in October of 2008. Memory serves, it might be '09. I can't remember, but that really set off a chain reaction where the loan markets and the lending markets, the bond markets, everything just completely froze, and
Hmm.
it was terrifying for about a half a day there in the markets. And the Fed stepped in, and they dropped rates to zero. They started printing money, and they did a lot of bailouts for these Wall Street banks that were overextended with these mortgage-backed securities.
Yeah.
And so yes, to answer your question, they did. But where the Fed screwed up was that they did not clearly explain which banks they were helping out and which banks and which other Wall Street backed entities they were
Mm.
not. And so some of them went under, some of them were bailed out, and it created so much uncertainty in the market that because no one knew who was too big to fail versus who was not. And
Yeah.
Lehman Brothers, in their minds, yeah, they were okay to fail, but Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Wells Fargo, all these other companies that had massive exposure to the mortgage-backed security market, they were not viewed that way, and they were bailed out to a certain extent. So that's where the Fed really screwed up back in 08, 09.
Mm.
And but I do think that, yes, I mean, they filled a market need at that time. The problem is they've kept doing it ever since then. They've been doing it nonstop, right? So,
Yeah.
here we are 12, 13 years later, and they've amassed a massive portfolio. All these companies together have amassed massive portfolios, and they're accounting for between 15 and 20% of sales in high growth, high population influx cities where where there's rent demand. People are moving
Yeah.
into those cities. So that's where they're buying. And the other point I'll make about these Wall Street backed funds that are buying these houses, they're not buying all the houses. Like there's too many houses out there, right?
Yeah.
The difference is, or the most important point is, that they are buying the important houses. They're buying the ones that first time buyers want. And so
Mm.
these houses are all kind of priced. I'm just giving Nashville as an example. Let's call it 350 to 400 as a good starter house in and around the metropolitan statistical area of Nashville.
Yeah.
They're the one in there. They're paying cash for them, and they're making it impossible for first time buyers who don't have cash to buy
Yeah.
those houses. And that's where the big backlash is happening.
So wouldn't it though, if they buy, say, the first time home buyers, it raises those prices, which makes people that can somehow afford it to buy more, which then raises all the other prices of all the other homes around it. So it's not like the 350s are going up to 450s and the ones that are around 800 are staying the same. This at 800, they're still going up too. So it's just really making it more expensive for everyone because supply and demand.
To a certain extent, they are. Yeah, I mean, they're not really. They have to look at. I'll back up a second and give you a little background in terms of how it worked when I represented one of these Wall Street backed funds. And I
Mm.
can't mention their name because I am under a non-disclosure agreement, but they all work pretty much the same way. They're all doing it. There's Invitation Homes, which was spun off of Blackstone back in, I think, 2017. They're a
Mm.
16 or 20 billion dollar company now in terms of market cap. But how they basically operate is they come in, they pick their group of agents that they're going to work with. They don't pick one because they're buying so many, right?
Yeah.
So I was probably one of 10 or 15 agents that was representing them, and they would target specific zip codes, and they would say, "Here are the zip codes that we want to buy in, and it has to be between this age and that age." And usually they don't want brand new usually because the numbers don't work because the houses are too expensive, but they really want to stick between like about 1970s to about let's call it early 2000s in terms of build year,
Mm.
and they want to stay around 2,000-ish square feet, nice starter rental property. And what they do is they get agents like me at the time to go around, scour for new listings, scour for existing listings, and we would literally have to put together a financial model for that specific property before they would even touch it. And
Mm.
that's how detailed it got. And you would have to look at the quality of the finishes, what's going to be needed to be replaced, what are the estimated rents. Show me some comparable estimated rents from past transactions. I mean, you had to go into a lot of detail per property before you even got the offer in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the difference is because they had, most of these Wall Street backed funds, they have basically a revolving credit line. And
Yeah.
so they can offer cash, and their credit lines are at an interest rate substantially below what you and I pay for a 30-year
Yeah.
mortgage. A 30-year mortgage, you're talking what, 2 to 4% roughly right now, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's say Invitation Homes. I mean, if you look at their last quarterly statements, their interest rate on their I looked it up before this meeting, by the way. That's how dedicated I am to this. Their interest rate on their revolving credit line is 1.4%. So what does that mean, John? Well, what that means is that they can go in, and if you and I are competing for that house and they're competing for that house, they can pay, depending on the size of the house, anywhere from, let's call it, eight to $15,000 more, and on a net basis, for the seller, the seller is going to get $8,000 to $10,000 more for them, but the cost to them is the same to you and I because they're paying less on interest expense for their loan. So it puts us at a competitive disadvantage because they're paying cash and because they can pay more because of the lower interest rate on their loans.
Yeah.
And before I go any further, a lot of this information did come from a Slate article
Mhm.
that I read a couple of days ago. Is a great article. You can go look it up. Just type in Slate and Wall Street, and it'll pop up, I'm sure. But it's a great article and gives a lot of this data too. So
Yeah, I mean that's yeah. It just puts people like you and me trying to buy a house, like you said, at a disadvantage because they can come in with 30 grand over, and it's like usually when people buy, you as a real estate agent probably know this, when someone's given, from their loan, their budget is 800,000. They always go to the very tippity
right,
top of that,
right,
right?
right.
It's never like, hey, I'm gonna go for something for 600, even though I qualified for eight, right? It never, maybe once in a while, right? So those people come in and they're like, oh, this is every penny I have. I've asked parents and family for a little more, and then someone that comes in, it's like, here's 30 extra grand, boom,
Yep.
gone. And
Yeah,
then
and how do sellers turn that down? They're closing in 2 weeks.
yeah,
Oftentimes they don't do inspections. The one that I worked for, they did do inspections, and they often did try to come back to the sellers after they put it under contract, say, "Hey, we found all this stuff. The max we can pay now, now that it's been off the market for 10 days, the max that we can pay now is, you know, X minus 5,000 or X minus seven
yeah.
thousand because we see all these repairs we have to do prior to us getting it rented." Um, One of the other interesting aspects that I kind of backed into when I was working for one of these firms is their payback period in terms of when they buy a property versus the estimated rents they have. Now, I'm excluding management fees, from this calculation because certainly they have to have a management team to manage all these rental properties.
Yeah.
But if you exclude that, even if you still budget for repairs, I was coming up for the company I was working with. I was coming up with between, I'd say about 9 to 10 year payback in terms of the rents versus the purchase price, right?
Yeah.
And you're excluding debt servicing costs and things like that. But think about that for a second. Is that you and I we get typically, not all the time, but typically we get anywhere from a 15 to 30 year loan,
Yeah.
and because of how they're structured with their low interest rates on their revolving credit lines and the rents that they can get for a lot of these properties, they're able to pay it back at, let's call it, 30 to 50% sooner than we are, as a private individual.
And
So
then
that's a big thing.
and then also on top of that is they keep the asset too. So if they're paying it off in 9 or 15 years when we're 15 to 30, they still have that asset that's going up in value. And the thing is with people like you and me, just humans, we're on a time crunch, right? We die at what's the average age, around 77 or something like that. So we only have a very small window to do the things that we want. A corporation, they don't have a lifespan. They're there for as long as the company can make money. So they can think 50 years in advance. While humans like, well, I'll be dead, So it's like they can like plan this stuff and they're like, look, we put in all this money now. The Earth's just getting more populated. More people are moving to these bigger areas. We can weather the storm for X amount of years. It makes no difference because eventually these things are going to pay for themselves in 9, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it is. And then they just amass more and more and more and, an exponential curve. And it'll just amass more money and more money and more money. And then it's just going to be interesting to see if this cycle continues, if nothing happens. Where do you think it'll be in 50 years from now?
Well, it's a great question. And if you look at what their portfolios have done over, let's call it, the last 10 years of, you
I
know,
looked at their stock. It has good dividends and it's been going up. And I'm like, well, maybe I should invest.
it's throwing off cash like crazy, right? And
Yeah.
so the key is that while they're not, going back to a point I talked about earlier, is they're not buying all the homes, but they're buying most important homes. And that Slate article I mentioned, in some zip codes, they're buying 90% of the homes that come for sale. So they're literally redistricting or recalibrating entire neighborhoods where it used to be owner occupied. They're now rental. And
Yeah.
imagine you being an owner in some of these properties where, let's say, 10 years ago you bought in there, and now here it is 10 years later, and literally every one of your neighbors is a renter. Well, renters don't, I mean, no offense to renters, but they typically don't take as good a care as the property as an owner does. They're
Yeah.
more transient, right? They're moving in and out, moving in and out. So it's a little bit different feel. You don't get that neighborhood feel, and I think that's the other big complaint of these companies.
Well, in
But
my complex alone, I don't know how many units. I think there's like 80 something units. It used to be all owner occupied. And now they're saying it's like all the older people who have been here for a while are mad because it's like 50% now are renters just in this my complex.
Yeah, and are you? I don't know if you're in a condo or if you're in like a
Like a
uh,
townhome.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, that's a perfect example, right? I mean, I have several, rental properties that are condos and townhouse type things. And when I bought one, 17 years ago, I might have been one of the only rental properties in there. And the big negative for that is that once you cross that 50% threshold, where
Mhm.
more than 50% of the units are rented versus owner occupied, it makes it very difficult to resell those loans. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac on the secondary mortgage markets, they won't touch them because they see that as a higher risk of foreclosure.
Really?
Yeah, so that's why a lot of, at least in Nashville, what they're doing is they're being very strict now because of all these companies and investors, unfortunately, like me, who buy rental properties, that they want to they put in bylaws into the homeowners association bylaws that says no more than X amount of these units can be rental. You have to have a rental permit. You have to have all these requirements in order to rent it out, and that
Hmm.
prevents from hitting that. Because what happens if they go over that 50% threshold? It makes it more difficult for an owner occupied person to be able to buy one of those units because they can't get a Freddie Mac or a Fannie Mae loan,
Hmm.
a conventional loan. So that's a real issue. And
Well, I know in my complex, they don't allow VA loans. I know
right,
that much because I was in competition. And I'm like, oh, who else am I in competition with for my bid and my offer? And they're like, well, there's two others, but they're VA and they're not going to be accepted through the HOA. So it's just you. I'm like, oh, perfect. This was 3 years ago, though.
yeah, this is a really interesting. You just brought up another article that I read. I wish I could remember where I read it, but uh, the one way that I think that the government has really dropped the ball to help out first time buyers that are trying to compete against these Wall Street backed funds is they make it so difficult for buyers using government backed mortgages such
Mm,
as FHA loans, first time buyer loans, and VA loans. They make it so difficult for buyers and sellers to do a transaction like that that if they just streamlined that operation and made it a lot easier and made it less costly, because if
mm,
you use an FHA or VA loan, they use an FHA or VA appraiser,
mm,
a government backed, government representing appraiser. And those guys can require certain repairs or certain changes to the property prior to closing after you've already signed all the documents, and the seller has to pay it. So a seller is disincentivized to work with an FHA or a VA buyer. And
oh,
and
that's
so that's
interesting.
where they've really dropped the ball, is that, Wall Street's coming in, they're throwing cash at you. Why don't you make it easier for first time buyers to buy a house instead of
Yeah.
making them go through all this red tape and having these kind of archaic clauses like that makes sellers not want to work with you. So what do sellers care about? Sellers don't care about anything else other than the bottom dollar that they're getting, right?
Yeah,
Most of them.
exactly.
Most of them. There's rare occasions where I've seen where the seller has, you know, their heartstrings were tugged by, some couple that wrote a letter along with their offer.
Yeah, I
But
know.
it's really rare. It's really rare.
Yeah.
Most sellers care about the money. And so
Yeah.
why don't you make it easy? I don't understand why the government, it makes it so difficult to do these first time loans. So
Yeah. Do you have
it's
your clients write letters?
absolutely, I've done it, and I've found it to be a complete waste of time. It
Yeah,
never
I know
works.
they never.
I don't think I've ever gotten one to work ever.
Yeah. Maybe if you're tied at an offer, maybe the letter might push you over the edge. But that was probably like back in the day. Now it's just like this like people are just making offers like the day they come up. Um, but back to I guess my question was
Mhm.
with Wall Street buying up these homes, like you said, almost 90% in some zip codes. What's if you could guess 50 years from now, right? What is that generation going to have to deal with? Do you think is it going to be worse than it is now? You think it's going to be better? Like you think
I think
everyone's going to rent?
well, I don't know. It's really difficult to say whether. I think a lot depends on the market, and how the real estate market holds up. The Fed came out today with their minutes today, and they didn't indicate that they're going to raise rates, but they're going to do it a lot sooner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at some point, these companies like BlackRock Blackstone and BlackRock, I guess,
Yeah.
Invitation Homes. What 50 years down the line, what does it look like? I don't know. I would imagine they'll probably tie their their portfolio of homes to where people are moving. They're not going to just hold all homes, because some cities, some big MSAs are decreasing in population. And
Mhm.
I talked about that in a recent inflation video, that, you know, California, New York, all these high tax, really big cities, people are moving out of those. Well, Blackstone, they don't want to own houses. They don't want to own a large portfolio of houses in cities that are experiencing a population, decrease. They were only
Mhm.
concentrated on big cities where they're really growing. And
Yeah.
my guess is that that's probably what they'll do, is that they'll pick, maybe they'll pick and choose certain inventory each year to sell, and then reapply that to other cities that are growing. I can't imagine them wanting to hold, an infinite supply of homes. But in some zip code, in some cities like Atlanta, for example, they have 12, 13,000 homes. And I can tell you from my experience working with a couple, or working with one, but knowing of competitors here in Nashville, I was shocked when I found out the numbers of homes that they owned. And this was 10 years ago. I mean, they had inventory of 10 and 12,000, 13,000 homes just in the Nashville area. So, and usually what they do is they pick and choose those high growth areas like Nashville was for the last 10 years, Atlanta, Charlotte, cities like that, where the rents make sense.
Mhm.
But again, to answer your question, I think in 50 years, I think they'll probably have some, a lot of it will be sold off as dividends. They'll just increase the dividends to shareholders. They'll probably sell off some inventory in cities that are underperforming, and reapply it elsewhere. But there's too many homes. There's so much land that we haven't even touched as a country.
Oh, I
We
know.
got 901 million acres of farmland right now. That's in for actual farmland, and that's not even including woodland. So we got land everywhere. It's just,
Yeah.
there's going to be sprawl. There's going to be more, building out, further away from the cities. And to tie back to a point that we talked about in a previous live stream, it doesn't matter where you live these days, right? Everything's
Yeah.
telephonic, or over Zoom and all that. So I just think that we're going to have more sprawl over time. And um, you know, I, there's just there's too many houses being built and too much inventory coming online. They can't buy it all, right? They're going to have to pick and choose their zip codes, and which cities they want to focus on.
It's gonna just a thought just hit my mind. Obviously, I'm a big Elon Musk fan. Do you know about his Hyperloop?
Yeah, I've read about it briefly.
So it's almost
Crazy.
like as this pandemic made everyone work from home, so everyone's like, well, I don't have to go into work. Let me go out more east, west, wherever they are, away from the city. And at the same time as they're doing that, the Hyperloop comes in that actually brings everyone closer faster. So it's
Right.
just like it's gonna be a weird thing, like when everything like kind of works out in
Well,
like
and and he's also working on that home, solar power generator, that
Mhm.
people are going to eventually have, to take them off the grid completely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's kind of hitting all these different angles, as it relates to people moving further away from the city, but still being able to access the city quickly with the Hyperloop. So it's pretty interesting.
He also has a Skynet that has the internet wherever you are.
Oh God, Skynet. That makes me think
Oh,
of like
not Skynet.
Terminator.
Sorry, Skylink. No, what's it? Not Skylink. Starlink. Starlink. Sorry, not Skylink. Skynet is the Terminator thing. Starlink. Starlink. He has basically. You basically can get internet anywhere, type of thing.
Crazy.
So if
Yeah.
you live in the middle of nowhere, you can still get it. But yeah, yeah. This I know. Like to pertain it back to comics, Blackstone, which I looked up, is $650 billion in assets or whatever it is, net worth
Yeah.
or market cap or whatever it is,
Hmm.
also bought CGC. And CGC is owned by CCG, which owns a bunch of different grading. Does it own a action figure grading company? Is that part
Not
of
that
it?
I'm aware of. No, I mean, I know that we talked about this offline, and they do some memorabilia and stuff like that. I think they do a lot of authentication
Yeah.
of memorabilia and things like that, but they don't do the actual grading of the item itself. Um, but I mean, how fascinating was that news? Just hot on the heels of your first,
Yeah.
Blackstone video. And I mean, I started trying to come up with who is the most likely next acquisition candidate to go along with CGC. And to me, it's WATA, WATA. I mean, they
Mhm.
grade,
Video
video
game.
games and things like that. So something like that, I think, makes a lot more
But
sense.
WADA is owned by Heritage.
Oh, it is. Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah.
So
My theory is completely blown up. Thanks a lot.
so that's why, if you ever know, so VGA graded video games before WATA.
Yeah, they're with AFA. They're part of AFA.
Okay, so then WATA started grading video games, and then Heritage got them, and now you only see WATA graded games, and they really there's something going on with them. But you don't become $1 billion company without stepping on a few backs. So
right.
But I mean, could you see maybe CGC buying up one of your action figure grader things, which then would be owned by Blackstone?
I would be really shocked if they didn't go some route to diversify, CGC. We saw with the minority investors that they picked up. They're getting it. They got some sports names, Andre Iguodala. They got the GM from the 76ers, and Rock Nation. So they got a lot of the entertainment stuff. But I think if they're going to go down that route of action figures and things like that, I think that they're probably, they got their choice of number one. There's 2 or 3 big companies, 2 in the U.S., 1 in the U.K., and I believe they're all privately owned. They're all, I know for a fact 2 of them are. So I just don't know if they want to go down that route of dealing with vintage kind of like loose little dolls and stuff like that versus like, this is just my mindset. I mean, it's my mindset, but it's like, okay, cards and slabs, comic slabs. It's almost like it seems like it'd be easier to streamline that than getting into the customization that's involved with a lot of the junk that you see behind me. And I don't know if they want to go down that route or if it's not profitable enough. That's the other problem, is that the submission rates are so high with comics and trading cards that the profit margins are probably much more substantial, I would think.
So what do you think? Something like this, like Blackstone getting into CGC, great. Let's just talk comics because that's what I'm more familiar with. What do you think a big company, massive company getting into comics is going to do for the overall comic market? Do you think, I personally think it's going to skyrocket them because now people are like, hey, it's going to make it look like a Picasso, like pretty soon.
I don't disagree with that at all. And I've mentioned that many times that I think that to a certain extent, a lot of these kind of graded items that I collect and you sell, there is an art aspect to it that we have always been viewed on the periphery to a certain extent. Yeah. And the mainstreamization, I guess, of this, the mainstreaming of what they're doing, and bringing this kind of to Wall Street. I don't know whether Blackstone is going to view this as a cash cow type of property. You got all kinds of different companies, right? You got high growth companies and really growing like crazy, and then you have other companies like industrial fasteners. It's a cash cow, right? You're not growing like crazy, and you have a set cash flow each year. And so I just don't know. I mean, I'm assuming that Blackstone's viewing this as a high growth kind of company, given all the employees that they've just added and all the kind of advisory board they're putting together, but their expertise is limited, so that that's why they pulled in a lot of those minority investors. Do I think it's going to grow the comic business and graded collectibles as a whole? Absolutely. I don't see how it couldn't. Yeah. I think the only concern is that the quality of service with CGC, based on, not only your videos but some others online. I mean, it's the quality of service could go down even further than it has. And
I just don't think they care. I think they have such a stronghold on the market that they're like, who cares, right? And I honestly just don't think they care about that. I think that, and most of the time that happens is the lower end books, and I think they just don't care. Like I have some other horror stories that I'm not going to post, but that are far worse than anything I've posted before, and it would not be good. They've already banned me before because they don't like what I say or do. So, yeah.
Well, let me tell you, as someone who just sent in his first CGC submission, I sent in 33 items, and all of them are modern garbage. So you're giving me a lot of stuff to look forward to. I'm going to find human hairs and dead insects inside the slabs. So I'm really excited about that. Thanks a lot for getting my hopes up. Appreciate that.
Well, I mean, I've done my more recent videos, and they've all been much better.
Yeah, they look
And
great. Yeah, they're all good.
I comment. I tell people exactly how it is. I'm like, look, the slabs are great, no cracks, no missing issues, nothing. Whatever the issues was for like 2 months seems to be resolved, and I get a ton of stuff in, and so I call it like I see it, and it's fine to me. I honestly don't think. I think they really don't care, but I think they care enough, right? Just to adjust enough, right? But they definitely have issues. I don't think this is going to make CGC any better as quality control will be. But as far as the grading, because the problem is they have such a stronghold. You have nowhere else to go. I mean, you can go to CBCS, but I've talked to people online, and they've literally sent them at the same time, and it's been like 6 months, and neither. And I'm like, why is CBCS so far behind? Like, they got bought out by Beckett, which is a much bigger company, not as big as Blackstone, obviously, but I thought they were supposed to work out all these kinks years ago. But I think they just have such a stronghold. They're like, well, where are you going to go? That kind of thing.
Right. Right.
So,
Well, yeah, and in the action figure world, I mean, we have two big companies here. Action Figure Authority, who was first. VGA is a subsidiary of them, and I use Collector Archive Services only because I have so much weird crap, and they're backed up too. And I'm like you. I call out both of them whenever I see something I don't like or I think they're doing something wrong. And to their credit, I mean, they both are very good about updating their customers now with press releases and where they are on turnaround times and what they're doing to try to improve on stuff that I've complained about. So to their credit, at least we get some responses, right?
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, going back to your question about what's the effect Wall Street going to do? To me, all it's going to do is bring in more high net worth individuals that
Yep.
used to collect Monet that now
Mhm.
maybe want to get your Hulk 181 that you just unboxed,
Yeah.
something like that. And
Well, that's not for sale.
no,
If
I
you
know, I
want to
know,
pay
I
me
know.
$1 million, sure.
But I mean, I can't tell you how many people that I've met through my channel that have contacted me offline and said, hey, I'm looking to buy XYZ figure. Can you help me find it? And their budgets are what I probably spend in 5 years. And they're dropping 20, 30, $40,000 a month on
Yeah.
some of this stuff. And they've told me that I wouldn't even start buying this stuff if I hadn't started watching your stupid videos. So imagine, and I'm a peon, right? I'm a nothing. Imagine what Blackstone and having Rock Nation and Jay-Z and all those guys. I mean, what happens when Jay-Z starts pimping, CGC 9.8, slabs on his Instagram?
Well, I did a video, one of my earlier videos, where I did like a reaction video of someone where Snoop Dogg traded a car for a Kobe Bryant rookie card.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it's like, I'm like, that's what we come to, where people are literally going, here, take this classic, all redone car for a card. And it wasn't even, there's two types of those cards. It's the chrome refractor, and that's like 10 times the price of the one he got. The refractor one sells for like hundreds of thousands. The one he got sold for like 30 to 40.
Yeah,
And
and so I mean that's what I'm saying though. I mean, I think that as that advisory board, that Rock Nation, those kind of folks, those entertainment and sports moguls. I mean, they're minority investors now. They're directly incentivized in their own pocketbook to really pimp CGC books now and trading cards or whatever else. And I just think it's going to pull in a whole different group of collectors that. I mean, I'm a perfect example of that, right? I started watching your channel and some of the other channels out there. I never bought a graded comic book in my life, and
Mhm.
up until this year, I've got 80 CGC books now, and I never would have even started collecting if I
Are
hadn't
they
been
all Star
watching you
Wars
guys. Well, no, they're all modern. Yeah, they're all modern junk. I mean, I don't have anything that's worth anything, but I think Doctor Aphra first appeared.
Are they a lot of Star Wars comics though?
Yeah, most of them are Star Wars stuff. Yeah, because I'm a
Yeah.
nerd. But yeah, I mean, I think I got a Doctor Aphra first appearance. Doctor Aphra first appearance. That's my most expensive book. The rest of it's all modern garbage, right? But I'm still collecting it, and I'm a perfect
Yeah.
example of someone that I was already collecting Star Wars stuff, but for every one of me, there's 50 more high net worth individuals that don't have anything and don't have any collectibles, and they're going to see that like, man, that is cool. That would look awesome on my wall, and I
Yeah.
could get 10 of those, and I could brag about how expensive they are. That's what they're going to do.
I would say with social media, it's really fueled the fire of collectors, because now you can find people that are like when I was in school, like there might have been one or two other kids that like were into comics. like in my
Hmm.
school, and they were always like the nerdy, weird kids, and no one talked to me just like me. And so it's like, it's like, oh, okay, but now you can go on the internet. Well, I mean, comics are cool now, but now you can go on the internet and you can like show pictures and you can have like, I mean, look at my channel or your channel. It's just like doing about figures or comics, and you have this huge community, and they all build each other up and all help, each other and stuff like that. And I think that social media alone has like really fueled this collector's market, and just showing what there is and actually exists, and like, hey, this stuff is cool, and other people think it's cool.
And
Um,
accessibility too. I mean,
mhm.
for someone who's looking for a specific comic or a specific action figure, I feel like social media in general has made it so much easier to acquire stuff.
Mhm.
A guy came to me who was an older collector. He's probably in his late 50s or early 60s. And he said, I've been looking for this figure for 10 plus years. If you find this specific figure, I'll pay you a finder's fee. And I called him back and I had it acquired for him in less than 24 hours because
Yeah,
I just knew people through the, I didn't say, I don't want your finder's fee. I'm just trying to help you, Dad. But
yeah,
I found it for him in less than a day. And he's like, I don't understand. How did you find it so fast? I've been looking for years for this. I was like, you're just not looking in the right areas. eBay is not where you're going to find this stuff.
yeah,
These really rare collectibles that, especially some of the stuff that you show that come back from CGC. I mean, you're not going to find that. A lot of that stuff is at your local comic shop. You got to really have the right connections and the right sellers and all that. And that's where social media, I think, has helped a lot.
yeah. Social media and just like years of being in the business, like you and me, and the same thing in comics. I mean, I just had a collection. This guy hit me up and he's like, you know, he had some financial issues and he was like, I need to like let this go. And he's like, my local comic shop is going to give me like pennies on the dollar. And he's like, I trust you to give me a good deal. And I'm like, this is what I can offer. And he's like, that's amazing. And then boom, did a deal. Right. And
Love
so
it.
it's like, some people, it's like they don't have the time to throw it up on eBay and get trash prices anyways. And it's a lot of work too. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Hey, one
just
of my
doing it.
buddies, just today, man, just one of my buddies today. He's friends with a seller that had sold on eBay all the time. He's like the guy contacted my good buddy Chris. He's been in some live streams. He's like, I got this collection. I want to get rid of. I've been hoarding for 20, 30 years. Do you want it? And he was fully aware that my buddy Chris was going to be reselling the whole thing. He's like, I want you to make a profit, but give me a fair offer. Very
Yeah.
similar to some of the stories you talk about, like when you met a guy at an In-N-Out Burger or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he gave him a very fair price, but he just posted. He sent me some photos of this stuff. It was like $40,000 of action figures, and that's the kind of thing that you get with just making the right connections and along the way in these different collecting groups. So
Yeah.
it's
Um,
just incredible
any,
stories
any
like that.
turtles in there? Any
No,
turtles?
man, all Star Wars, all Star Wars. He sticks to what he knows. He's a Star Wars guy like me.
Any of those Boba Fett's? Boba Fett's?
Not any
Those-
rocket, but yeah, those prototypes. I'm still amazed it went that low because I double checked my information. That prototype Boba Fett that you talked about in your video,
Mhm,
that was the earlier version. It was the
mhm.
L slot, and so not to diverge too much, but that was the very, very earliest example, and it sold for $20,000 less than the later example that had sold, maybe 3 years ago. So I was shocked that
What's
it went
uh,
that low.
what's the most expensive, say, action figure or Star Wars figure? Like,
Um,
what's the action number one version? The Holy
oh
Grail.
gosh, there's I don't know that Boba Fett's probably it. I mean, that
Really?
for a prototype. If you're talking about licensed stuff, it's there's some very, very rare Brazilian licensed stuff that's out there that sells for $50,000 on a card, but we don't touch comic prices. There's no way.
Uh, well, I mean, eventually.
Maybe.
I don't know if it will ever get there, but it could. Uh, Star Wars is still a huge, huge property. So, uh,
David, what I've found just over the last year is that you are extremely intelligent to stick to comic books because what happens is you run out of space with all these little plastic dolls. My little plastic girly dolls over here, they've completely taken over my room, and that's part of the reason also why I got into comics is that they're sleek, they're very kind of I can see a lot of these celebrities that are part of this minority investment group. I can just see them kind of just hawking this very sleek slab, and
yeah,
you can't get that same kind of vibe in a lot of their social media by showing like a little plastic doll. It just doesn't come across the same way. So,
Yeah,
I
but I don't know. I always wanted, like, when I have time to go back, I want to get, like, rebuild my turtle figure collection. That's what I want to rebuild. I used to
man,
have.
you would not believe the prices on those. I mean, I'm part of a couple of Facebook groups where turtle stuff comes up, and all these rare foreign variants, German cards, and like Japanese. I mean, the people are throwing down 3, 4, 5 grand like it's nothing, and I'm like, what is going on? I mean, it's GI. So on a side note, GI Joe, by the way, big now.
Mhm.
And I sold my vintage collection my vintage GI Joes right before they started going up. And I went back and I found like the database or like the spreadsheet of all the ones I had and the grades and all that stuff. I was like, oh no, because for tax reasons I had to show what I sold it for versus what I
Yeah.
bought for it. Oh my god! So I just really quickly kind of ran through the numbers, and I think I lost by not waiting for about a year and a half. I lost something in the neighborhood of almost 20 grand that I
Ugh.
could have captured in value if I
Ugh.
just waited about a year and a half.
You
And
know,
it was heartbreaking.
that would be enough to outbid Blackstone.
It was bad. It was depressing, man.
Oh man. Yeah. Oh man. Well, I guess I mean, do you have any, like, final thoughts on? I know we really diverged.
No, it's okay. One final. I want to have a couple final thoughts as it relates to the Blackstone stuff, and so I've seen it from both sides, right?
Yeah,
I've
tell
seen it
me
from
what's
the
the pros and cons. Let's say if you are a renter, or I guess this an average person trying to buy. Like, there's got to be. I mean, is there any pros to this, like positives?
I think that the only pros are if and when, and I'm certainly not privy to what their investment strategies are, but I think that the only pros are when they go into high foreclosure rate neighborhoods now that are really, under a lot of pressure in terms of like rehabilitation and rehabbing and things like that. Like Detroit's a perfect example, right? They basically went bankrupt, right? And every third house was foreclosed on.
Yeah.
I think where the benefit lies is if they can go into areas like that and kind of get it fixed up and rejuvenated and bring the population back to those cities. But that's not what they're doing, right? What they're doing is they're focusing on high population influx areas, high growth cities, and they're basically milking renters, right? They're
Yeah.
buying these first time houses, and to a certain extent, they're charging top dollar for rents. I've heard, not I don't have any kind of direct experience of this, but I've read circumstantial evidence that they have very poor management on the rental side of things,
That's what I've
um,
heard too.
and they don't fix repairs quickly. I mean, I can tell you for me, I manage 30 properties. It takes a lot of effort to just manage 30. Now imagine if you're Invitation Homes and you've got 12,000 homes in Atlanta. Just the management of those and finding contractors to in this kind of environment where everyone's doing rehab project, just trying to keep up with the repairs and keep it up to date, it's got to be an impossible task. So
Yeah.
I think at some point they're going to hit uh, such a level of volume that the service quality is going to go down. It's kind of like what happened to CGC, to circle back to them, right? Because their volume has gotten so large and they got 12,000 homes. How do you manage them all? How do you keep them rented? How do you keep them updated? And how do
Yeah.
you keep the renters happy? So I think that's where they're going to really run into some problems as they try to continue to buy more of this stuff. And also the market's so expensive now that they're probably not buying as much now as they were, 5 years ago,
Yeah.
just because the numbers don't work as well. Um, so that's the negative. But I think that uh, for those out there that are struggling with trying to get their first house, I mean, I deal with it all the time with first time buyers. I've got one that we've put in 18 offers. We have not got an offer yet. And my only comment to you is just keep saving. Pay your rent. Keep everything current. Just keep doing your job and all that. But whatever extra dollars you got, try not to waste it on some of the stuff you've talked about in past videos, and keep building up that that down payment, because the closer you can get to that 20% down payment, that puts you into conventional territory. Your interest rates drop. It becomes a lot more attractive to sellers, and eventually you'll get one. And
Yeah.
one of my business partners' clients, I mean, we put it, I know, at least a dozen offers. But guess what? We finally got them under contract last week, and they got a loan. They're not paying cash, so it is possible. And you just got to be in this environment. You just got to be patient. And uh, me personally, I hope that this is just transitory and that the supply and demand equalizes a little bit as we head into the fall. But it's just going to be tied to interest rates and what supply does, and whether builders can get enough inventory out there to supply those folks that are looking to buy new construction. Because if builders can get their inventory out there and get it built and ready for all this demand, um, that takes away a lot of the competition for some first
Yeah.
time buyers, because they're gonna buy brand new, right? Some buyers, even some first time buyers, will buy brand new,
And
and
brand
some,
new, there is no negotiating. It says
yeah, well,
flat
yeah,
fee.
very little,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
I mean,
usually like, this is the price. If you want the new fridge or you want the new carpet or whatever, that's negotiable. It's like usually a flat fee, and you just pay it and you get in.
yeah, and even here, new construction is going for above multiple offers now. Houses that aren't even built yet, multiple offer situations. They're basically throwing a lot out there and saying, "Here's what we're going to put inside it. You don't have any choice of finishes. Here's where it is in the neighborhood. Bring us
There's
an
a,
offer," and they're getting multiple offers. It's crazy.
there's a YouTuber that's running for governor of California. Meet Kevin. I don't know if you know who that
No,
is.
he can
Uh,
only do better though. I mean, let's be honest.
I know. But one of his plans is, the issue is, in California, they literally let no one build. There's so many like walls that you have to get over to build, and then on top of that, you're only allowed to build so many new homes and all this kind of stuff, which keeps the supply really low. Which, in my thought, is like, someone who owns a lot of real estate doesn't want their real estate to go down, so make sure that no one builds new homes. But
Some
one of his
lobbying
things,
going on there.
what?
There's a lot of lobbying going on there, is my
Yeah,
guess.
so this guy, Meet Kevin, is one of his things is to increase the amount of homes being built, by getting rid of all these laws, that like hoops you have to jump through. Um, yeah, I guess my final thought on this is, which I've always said, is get in a home as soon as you can. Kind of like what you're saying, save that money, do what you can, because once you have a home, you're no longer subjected to someone else telling you how to live, right? I mean, maybe in other aspects, but like, you don't have your rent constantly going up. Because what if Blackstone owns 90% of your neighborhood and goes, you know what? Price increase $1,000 all around. Where are you going to move to? You try to move in your neighborhood, it's still $1,000 more. So it's, if you can get in a home, you can lock down that interest rate, you can lock down your rent or mortgage for the next 30 years or whatever your loan is, and it just makes life so much easier. And then you're secure. You're not, the less you can get your life dealing with outside sources, I think the better you'll be.
I
So
think also, and my second final thought is, I think that have some flexibility. And
mhm.
I'll give you a perfect example of that. So I used to live in Davidson County, Nashville. We had a 1,500 square foot little house, and we moved out to Williamson County, Nashville, Brentwood, which is a suburb. And the tax rates on metro property, Metro Nashville, Davidson County property versus here is night and day. So for example, I looked up what my old house, what the taxes are, the property taxes are for Metro Nashville now, and it's about 1,500, 18. I think it was $1,800 higher than what I pay for my current house. But my current house is located in one of the best school districts in the country, and we have over double the space that my old house had. So if you have some flexibility and give some real thought to do I really need to be in the city, in the heart of the
yeah,
city? Because your property tax rates are going to always go up, and they're always going to be more expensive than if you consider a suburb. And given what technology is doing and what companies are doing with making people come in, um, you know, getting in the right suburbs that are still high growth, like wherever you are, it can really save you a lot of money long term just on property taxes. I mean,
yeah,
over 10 years, let's say 10 years ago when I sold my other house versus now, I mean that's a difference of 20 to, let's call it $1,800 times 10. That's $18,000 I'm saving over the
yeah,
course of moving to a different county that has lower taxes. So just have some flexibility with where you're willing to buy.
definitely. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, both from us, buy as soon as you can get it. I mean, if this is a good indicator of like Wall Street trying to screw you over some more, you know, just try to get in a house when you can. this save, do whatever you need to financially. Stop spending it on terrible things that aren't going to help
like
you.
comics and plastic dolls.
Yeah, don't buy comics and action figures. No, buy comics and action figures. Those will increase in value. No, and then when you need to sell them to buy a house, we have 2 people right here that are willing to
Yes, well,
buy your collection.
We will act as your middleman. That's for sure.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Thanks for coming on here. It was great.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, man. We went all over the place as always. I could do this all night.
Yeah.
I swear. I mean, it's
know.
like an hour flies by, you know.
It does. It's crazy. It's an hour. Yeah. Awesome. Again, John, Action Figure Grader. Check out his channel. Very cool dude. And yeah, I'm David, and have a good night.
All right. Night, everybody.